right, welcome to this week's Diamond Hands podcast for the week of September 7th, a division of the Dales Media Group. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Before we get into the podcast, important to share that all views on the Diamond Hands podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or our guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Joining me this week, as usual, is lead financial writer of the Dales Report, Benjamin A. Smith. Benjamin, how are things?
Things are great, Chad. How are you? How was your week?
Things are good. Summer's over. A little bit of excitement in the markets a little bit at the early this week, and then that was quickly squashed. But, you know, regardless, at the end of the day, excited to see what's going to happen here in Q4. Our good friend Anthony's off in the woods of Oregon this week, probably sampling the best bud that the country has to offer, so good for him. But it's just you and I this week.
Sounds good. Let's do it. Hopefully he's not on hiatus because of MSOs and his investment in cannabis, but we'll talk about that in a sec.
What was that? Anyways, let's begin. Cannabis, or should we even begin with cannabis? Challenging times again this week for the overall sector. MSOS took another pounding, closing down 9.54% in a holiday-shortened week. There is seemingly no end to the downside price action, Ben, despite a positive fundamental picture outside of regulatory uncertainties. So how much more selling, I guess, do you see taking place? Have we hit bottom yet?
Unfortunately, if I had to call it, I'd probably say no. And the reason why I say that is because
that's not what we want to hear, Ben.
I know it's not what you want to hear, but we always kind of give it like it is, right? And that's what our viewers like. So, we're here to give good calls, not popular calls. But
no, I hear you.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that the MSOs are very retail oriented at the time. We've talked about this several times. Everybody knows this. And, a lot of retail, I think, is trapped, right? A lot of retail was buying the bounce, the initial bounce after the sell-off, after the big run-up, after, the Democrats won the Senate runoff election in Georgia, giving them a Senate majority in the Senate. And there's a lot of excitement. People thought that regulations were going to appear pretty quickly. And, they've been buying the bounce the whole way. Just check out the sentiment on social media, right? And unfortunately, it's just been grinding down. It's been a brutal descent, considering that the broad... Oh, yeah. Yeah, considering, especially with the broad market being in such a bull market, right? So it's one thing to
You ever look back at the big picture and say, why? Why is this happening? Is this a strategy by institutions? Like, I don't know. Doesn't make much sense. But clearly, people have some crazy expectations from a pure legislation standpoint. And because that hasn't moved, it's just, yes, there's sell-off, but I'm surprised that we're seeing sell-off like this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's what's thrown investors into a loop, I think. The fact that the fundamentals it just doesn't make any sense. It's very counterintuitive. Like, for example, Needham came out with a note a couple weeks ago and basically showed a chart where, up to, say the last quarter or two, cannabis had been moving in lockstep with the fundamentals, the price of MSOs and all that. And the fundamentals keep going higher. Earnings are very good. The recent round was mostly in line, and some of these companies are growing 100, 150% year over year. Even sequentially, they're growing 15, 20, 25% is the norm, right? So these are high growth industries, and yet the price action keeps declining, and obviously that has to do with a lot of the regulatory situation, and it appears that things are just getting hung up, and unfortunately, it's in a feedback loop here where a lot of high retail participation, and most of them are already in. So the algos know that the order book isn't very strong on the buy side, right? So they're just, they're selling into rallies, capping it lower, and you just have a series of cascading price action, lower highs, and there's just not enough demand to really stabilize things as of yet.
I think a lot of people too, retail investors, still learning, not looking at market cap sizes, always looking at share prices. And when you look at this deal that happened between Gage and TerrAscend, an 11% premium, a lot of people turned off like that. And more forums that I do read online, this is the landscape as to how the U.S. is going to work right now. Minimal premiums where companies are buying out smaller players and the big MSOs are just getting bigger. That has to have some sort of mental toll or some sort of impact on the retail community right now. Do you not think?
Yeah, 100% it does. And we saw the same thing happen in the Canadian cannabis landscape as well. During the halcyon days when we're in these big bullish impulses, these huge premiums were being thrown around for any which company which didn't even have revenue. It was just more of a concept, right? And conceptual companies. And during the bear market impulses where things were on the decline, then the premiums would get a lot smaller, right? And obviously that doesn't help sentiment, right? If you get into Gage Cannabis and it's IPOing at its opening price upon its listing is at $325. The IPO price is about $175 American, and then they're selling out for 11% premium at around the go public offering price. That's not going to inspire too many people to think that other companies that could get bought out are going to get a big premium. So it all feeds on the psychology, and right now the psychology is getting pretty bad. Probably, especially this week, it's about as bad as I've seen it, where you're starting to see people throw in the towel.
Yeah, I hear you. I know there's three things that you wanted to point out with regards to like what's it going to take to get this sector to bounce back. So walk us through. What's the first thing that needs to happen?
Yeah, I mean, with now that it is what it is, and we all know how the situation is at the moment, we have to think. What is the $1 million question is, when is it going to rebound, right? Mm-hmm. How to look for a bottom for existing investors, when the bleeding going to stop, for new investors who want to buy in at the best possible price. And the way I see this turning around is really three main ways. The first way would be, I already touched on it, would be the capitulation selling. We saw it in Cresco Labs this week, where the intraday volume on a couple of sessions was the highest it's been since March. And, it was getting pretty indiscriminate at one point. But we need to see that on a huge sector-wide basis, where you're seeing Curaleaf, you're seeing GTI, you're seeing TrueLeaf, you're seeing all those sort of decline at once on average daily volumes that are 3 to 5 times or more to the downside, right? We're talking like down 10, 12, 14% days with huge volume. So that would be sort of a capitulation phase, which is usually the sign of a bottoming process taking place after a large protracted decline, where people are literally throwing in the towel because they can't take any more downside action. Number two, probably the least likely of the one I just mentioned, would be just, there's no capitulation, but this volume dries up, right? People know where this is going in a 3 to 5 year timeline, and they're just holding. They're just holding regardless at this point, and you don't really see that capitulation. You just see sort of downside volume drying up. So, you might see sort of a low base consolidation, bump along the low point, maybe 28 or 30 for a while, and then it just starts drifting up, and eventually an uptrend catches on, where there's just no more sellers and people are not capitulating. And the third way would be a catalyzing event, such as,
which means.
Well, it means like, something like a Constellation Brands buying Canopy Growth, except in the U.S. sector. Picture Coca-Cola teaming up with a big deal with Curaleaf. Now, I don't think the sector is quite there yet, but as we saw, there is precedent because, 3 or 4 years ago when Constellation Brands bought Canopy or made that huge investment in Canopy the second time around, the Canadian market was in a big bear market. It was in the summer. Prices were acting sort of like what we're seeing now in MSOs. It was down almost every day. Sentiment was terrible. And then out of the blue, Constellation Brand makes that big $5 billion investment, and the market took off like a rocket the next day. It was just a V bottom. Everything took off again. All was right with the sector again. So
tough to predict, but do you not see that happening in the U.S. landscape as well? You can't predict it, but do you not think some sort of event like that will happen eventually, where people unexpected that'll turn this industry around? Because when you look at the revenue that's being generated, the overall popularity, this is the part that just puzzles me right now as to why there's so much concern, because, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah, you're right. And then that's exactly why it's throwing everybody in a loop. Fundamentals keep going up. Earnings are great. Huge growth story. Growth is nowhere near abating or slowing down. So there's a huge growth runway ahead, and yet things keep declining. But unfortunately, this is not really a fundamental story right now. It's in sort of the crosshairs of not enough buyers, too much retail participation, and the focus right now, for better or for worse, is the regulatory side, which seems to be going slower than possible. I mean, Neil deGrasse has a huge podcast going, one of the most popular in the industry, and he was talking about how Joe Biden is just anti-cannabis and that he doesn't want to push legislation forward, right? So there's messaging like that that's getting out there.
Interesting.
There was a note about a vape note this week where Cantor Fitzgerald was talking about how vapes could be impacted at the dispensary level because of some regulations that are coming on, tobacco regulations on the FDA front.
How about the news out of California, too? I know a lot of states are in high demand. California appears to be not one of them, but I know you touched on that. Right now, they're saying for every 10 grams of available product, there's 1 gram of consumer demand. Whew. Not a state you want to be operating in.
Yeah, and that's what bear markets do, man. Like they, good news gets discounted, like the Air Wellness 5% normal course issuer bid, buying up to 5% of their stock, and it's down like probably 15% from those levels, right? All the good news is getting discounted, and then when you have bearish news, bearish analyst note, the California oversupply situation that's come to light, it just hammers sentiment even more. And you're right. You know, when I saw that news, the first thing I thought about was the Canadian cannabis sector. Now, the good news is what's happening in California is not going to be replicated necessarily throughout the country because those are all vertically integrated. They have to, cultivate in state and all that. So there's, supply is more constrained. But in California, where you have open grows and, they grow it all over the place in Humboldt County, Emerald, the Emerald Triangle, it's a lot different, and there's worries that could hit margins on some of the MSOs that operate there.
Interesting times. Okay, let's shift. Another vertical. How's that sound? Let's take a shower and just start over again, right? So psychedelics, I know it was another quiet week. We do have some bright spots, though, and I do think that there's a little bit of momentum that's starting to trend, but for the most part, a quiet week. The psychedelic ETF, ticker similar to the New York Exchange, PSYK, falling around 2% on a very low volume, I should say. Volume did not pick up this week after Labor Day, as many were probably hoping, but this will be more of a process than an event, do you not think?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was some hope with investors that, after Labor Day, everybody would just come back on their trading desk and, just start buying and that volume would pick up. But in my experience, being in the market throughout the years, it's not really like that. The weather is still good in a lot of places. There's still people vacationing throughout September. The weather is probably the nicest time of the year. So it doesn't just, people just don't magically sit in front of their desk and start buying, psychedelic stocks. They have to get into the flow of what's moving. They have to start looking at the technicals. They're all looking for the same cues that we're looking for. So the volume was still very light this week. There's nothing out of the ordinary in terms of price action. The benchmark psych ETF fell 2%, but so did the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So did big biotech. So did junior biotech on the Nasdaq indexes. So it was really in line. The one good thing that I'm seeing is Compass Pathways, which
Compass for sure.
It's fourth straight consecutive closing week, which is the first time it's actually done that. So that's changed to a buy the dips mentality, as we've talked about on our social media feeds. After testing the 29 level area, it rebounded, broke back through key support turn resistance, and now it appears that people are accumulating in front of the key phase 2B endpoint results due in Q4.
Yeah, well, I think there is some momentum that's building there for sure as we get closer and closer to those endpoints. And, from some of the people that we've spoken to, nobody really understands or knows what the actual information will come out of those trials. But so far, we are hearing stuff that's very, very positive, which is great to hear. And will be a huge catalyst, especially as the industry leader right now. Another bright spot within the industry was Revive Therapeutics, with a strong week rising 23% after word the company has hired a Washington lobbyist to vouch for basilamine, which comes to the forefront. We continue to like the name, obviously, with Revive, as a phase 3 trial continues to forge ahead. This is big. I know they're classified as a psychedelic company, but they also are an infectious disease. There's only a handful of companies worldwide to do a phase 3 right now. And, hopefully, obviously, and some of the safety protocols that they had met through these phase 3 trials seem to be very promising, but yet still a lot of unknowns, but clearly somebody took notice.
Yeah, somebody took notice, and I think the Lobbyist news, which came out in some sort of filing, Lobbyist filing, and then people picked up on it, and then they had one of the lobbyists, or the main lobbyist working for them, came out and made a tweet basically saying that they were lobbying directly for busilamine with the NIH, getting this in front of congressional health committees, things of that nature. So that definitely lit a fire in the stock because. As good as Revive has the good things going on with Revive, they don't have a lot of publicity. They're not Merck, they're not Pfizer, and the heightened visibility is something that the investors were looking for, and I think people are starting to take notice. If we look at the price action this week and some of the volume profiles, and they should, because unlike what Merck and Pfizer and their knockout oral COVID pill does, those are just antivirals. And busilamine could have potential antiviral action. We're going to see on that. And then it has other modes of action, such as attenuating spike protein to the ACE2 receptors, which is the main receptors which intake that virus. So it could have benefits that some of the antiviral big pharma concoctions don't have. So stay tuned.
And EUA seems to be it could happen. It's very probable. But at the same time too, nothing's obviously guaranteed, but there has been some progress that has been made even in countries like India. Maybe touch on a little bit about what and maybe refresh a lot of investors' memory as to some of the things that they developed recently over the summer in India related to EUA.
Yeah, a couple months ago, I believe it was May or June, they announced a supply agreement with Supriya Pharmaceuticals, which is a developer of drugs and generic drugs and those type of things in India. And they have approval to ship to, I think, like 70 nations throughout the world, something like that.
Yeah.
And they signed an agreement with them to be their exclusive distributor and maker of busilamine, to which to use in India domestically and export potentially into other nations should they get an EUA granted, right? So Revive is already setting up the background picture to get this distributed to other countries and get somebody to manufacture and distribute if the EUA comes through. So all the pieces, the background pieces are there. They just need the data to sort of confirm what people suspect might be, a good mode of action.
Well, we'll continue to watch that closely. I know it's one that you like. All right, lightning round time. And I guess it's time to make some picks. I think I'm going to actually jump in this week too, Ben.
Nice. So, you got your diamond hand glove on?
Hold on there, buddy. Let's get her diamond hand glove on. Here we go there, brother. All right, first pick. Who you got?
I'm going to go with Compass Pathways. Not much I like in the psychedelic sector at the moment, but they're showing continuing buy the dips action. Every week that comes is a week closer to phase 2B endpoints in Q4 within a 3-month window. I would say take advantage. Any big dips, buy Compass Pathways.
Okay, well, if you like Compass Pathways, my first pick is going to be Atai Life Sciences. Atai, as you know, holds a 19% stake in Compass Pathways, a company with over $450 million in cash, and we all know trials cost money, and diversification is key. They're the most capitalized company in the space and are poised to capitalize if Compass's Phase 2B studies meet endpoint, which it's just around the corner. So that's my first pick. I like Atai both in the short and long term. Your second pick?
Second pick, I'm going with MSOs. Now, with the caveat being that you might want to wait for that capitulation to take place. It potentially could, not a guarantee. If you do see a huge down spike in the market throughout all the big MSOs, we're talking 8, 10, 12, 14%. Volume is, say, 4 or 5 times above average daily volume, is a good time to get in. Maybe not get immediate returns right away, but this would be a good time to stake positions long term. So MSOs on big capitulation.
Duly noted. My last pick, WonderFi, the DeFi space. Why? when I look at the people involved in this company, the message that's getting out, and the trend that is being created in the DeFi space, I see nothing but growth both in the short and long term for this company. Josh Richards and his 40 million followers on social, and Kevin O'Leary obviously making the rounds. We all know retail space loves big news with big players, and that's the way the investment world works in the year 2021. So I like WonderFi both in the short and long term.
I like it. WonderFi is a good one.
Yeah, I think so. Full disclosure, I have a position in that company as well. So, listen, appreciate you checking in this week, and let's keep this close. Hopefully we get some better news in the cannabis landscape, but interesting to see how the psychedelic space is going to develop in the next couple of weeks, because I think we're on to something.
Absolutely. And Anthony, if you can hear me, we need you with crypto, buddy. So we'll see you next week.
Good stuff. All right, Ben, have a great week.
All right. Cheers, Shad.
Hey, if you want to learn more about the companies that we like, make sure to go to thedalesreport.com. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking here, and also follow us on Twitter at The Dales Report.